Is a gas tax holiday on the way? How much are taxpayers subsidizing non-citizen students? America's talking, and a look at the Illinois U.S. Senate race. This is the Center Square Daily for Thursday, March 19th, 2026. I'm your host, Greg Bishop. Fuel prices continue to tick upwards across the country. AAA has the current average for regular gas at $3.88 a gallon. That's up from $2.92 a gallon a month ago. Diesel fuel, which is used to transport goods back and forth in freight, used in the everyday economy and for just transportation in general, is at about $5.09 a gallon, and that's up from $3.67 a gallon a month ago. Now, how to relieve the pressure on increased gas prices from drivers at the pump differs on where you look. A bipartisan group of 38 U.S. senators are calling on the Trump administration to take action to provide energy assistance to those who need it as utility costs skyrocket. Senators are urging the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services to swiftly release approximately $400 million in remaining low-income home energy assistance program funding for fiscal year 2026. While that may help people with their utility prices at home, others are looking to suspend the federal gas tax through October 1st. U.S. Senators Mark Kelly from Arizona and Richard Blumenthal, both Democrats, introduced the Gas Price Relief Act to lower gas prices by temporarily suspending the 18.4 cents per gallon federal gas tax through October 1st. Democratic Connecticut U.S. Senator Richard Blumenthal said in a statement, President Donald Trump's, quote, war of choice with Iran is driving up gas prices across the country. And Americans, he said, shouldn't have to bear the additional economic burden of Trump's reckless decision-making. Now, if there was a holiday on the federal gas tax, the Committee for a Responsible Federal Budget this week estimated a temporary gas tax holiday would reduce the price for consumers by foregoing $3.5 billion in taxes from them for just 1 month. A 6-month plan would mean about $21 billion in savings for taxpayers at the pump. But the committee warns that could advance the insolvency of the Federal Highway Trust Fund to as soon as March 2027. They also warn that any savings the taxpayer could have from not paying those taxes at the pump could be offset by increases in gasoline and other prices. But to make up for the proposed gas tax holiday in federal transportation funds, Kelly and Blumenthal's bill, it would require the Department of Transportation to have funds swept from the Treasury to fund the trust fund, and also to have funds from the Leaking Underground Storage Tank Trust Fund to keep federal dollars for transportation fully funded during a possible tax holiday. But that is the federal tax of 18.4 cents on a gallon of gas, and it's just some of what drivers are paying at the pump across the country. There's also state gas taxes. California's average of gasoline for regular, it's $5.61 a gallon. Diesel is $6.02 a gallon in California, according to AAA. And California has the highest gas tax in the nation at 71 cents a gallon. Illinois has the second highest gas tax in the country, according to the Tax Foundation, at 66 cents a gallon. Neighboring Kentucky, their gas tax is 26 cents a gallon. Looking at a map, you can see how Illinois drivers are more impacted by Illinois' gas tax than their neighboring states, by more than double in some cases. And that's a persistent problem that you hear in Illinois, especially around the border of the states, with various convenience stores who might be on the Illinois side seeing less revenue as drivers and residents travel to neighboring states to not just fill up on gasoline with lower taxes, but also to go shopping at a retail store or go to a restaurant with their family. Now, Illinois doubled the state gas tax in 2019, and they have annual increases tied to inflation that kick in every July 1st. The state did have a temporary gas tax holiday a few years ago, but that annual increase continues. We'll find out whether there's an appetite in the Illinois State House to have another gas tax holiday as drivers continue to be hit with increased gas prices. But in California, that has the highest gas taxes in the country, gas prices soared this week. In Golden State, some are looking to find ways to lower those prices at the pump. The Center Square's Madeline Shannon reports Senate Bill 1035, authored by State Senator Tony Strickland, is the latest to be introduced this year that aims to save the state's drivers money at the pump by suspending the California gas tax for 1 year. The bill also aims to suspend the state's low-carbon fuel standard and cap and invest compliance for a period of a year. Now, under that bill, the price of gasoline in California could go down by at least $1.08 a gallon. Other bills introduced in California this year aim to have similar types of objectives. Assemblyman Jeff Gonzalez authored legislation in California that would also suspend the state's gas tax, which followed a bill from Assemblywoman Lori Wilson to establish a committee that would look at replacing the state's gas tax with a per mile charge that all Californian drivers would pay, regardless of whether they drove gas-powered or electric vehicles. Now, in Georgia, the House voted this week to suspend the state's motor vehicle tax for 60 days against the backdrop of those gas prices rising. The Center Square associate editor, Kim Jarrett, reports lawmakers tacked an amendment to House Bill 1199 in Georgia that allows for the suspension. Georgia's fuel tax adds about 33 cents to every gallon of gas and 37 cents to diesel fuel, according to the Georgia Department of Revenue. Now, the original bill aligns the state's tax code with the federal tax code, and that now goes to the Senate for approval, then to Governor Brian Kemp for his signature, which each are expected. Now, typically, taxes on motor fuel help fund transportation projects and roads and also bridges. But are some states doing it better than others? The Reason Foundation released a report this week that grades states on such taxpayer-funded infrastructure. California, with the highest gas tax in the nation, ranks number 49 in the country. Again, the highest gas taxes in the nation. Reason found that Illinois, with the second highest gas tax, comes in at number 37. Georgia, with the 17th highest at 33 cents a gallon, ranked number 2 in Reason's Road and Bridges report. Is this a management issue, a labor cost issue, an environmental issue? Be sure to join us tomorrow for the Center Square Daily as we delve deeper into the Reason Foundation's report and stay up to date on the prospect of a gas tax holiday near you with thecentersquare.com. Education reporter Esther Wickham takes a look at the increased scrutiny around the amount of taxpayer subsidies being given to non-citizen students, and she joins us now for the Center Square Daily. Esther, what are we finding out about this issue, and just how pervasive is it across the country?
Yeah, thanks, Greg. So July of last year in 2025, the Trump administration, first of all, since joining his second term, has definitely put a priority on cracking down on exactly what is America, spending its money on, what are taxpayers, getting that return on investment for how much money they're putting towards, especially in the category of education. And so we're seeing across the country now this renewed debate around, taxpayer-funded financial aid when it comes to illegal immigrant students. How much money are they getting from the federal government, and now specifically state aid going towards illegal immigrant students' education? And so over the last year, the U.S. Department of Education has kind of rolled back this decades-old policy that now requires, stricter eligibility for federally funded education programs. And so essentially this would require, verification, identity verification, so that, U.S. citizens can actually get the federal education funding that they need, since for so long there hasn't been that, requirement restriction. And so now we're kind of keeping tabs on what's actually going on when it comes to federal education as well as state aid. And within the reporting, since this has been rolled back, we're seeing a lot of states pop up with various programs, and the programs have been around for decades, but now they're kind of under a stricter scrutiny within the federal government, as well as state officials and education officials kind of questioning what is this money going towards, and is it actually impacting and helping U.S. citizens, or is it going towards illegal immigrant students? And from what we've seen, there are around 17 to 19 states, including Washington, D.C., that have some sort of state-funded financial aid to illegal immigrant students. And usually this is tied to residency or graduating from local high schools. So these kinds of students, are actually going to American schools and wanting to go to local community colleges or state universities, but programs, for example, like the California Dream Act application, as well as other programs we see in Colorado, Texas, New York, Illinois. These kinds of programs kind of allow students who don't have the documentation, that aren't U.S. citizens, so they're illegal immigrant students trying to get education. They don't have to apply for FAFSA. They can get these state aid financial aid to attend the university that they want without having to go to the federal government to prove identification.
And as you said, California Dream Act, you've got the Colorado application for state financial aid, you've got the Illinois Monetary Award Program that's been expanded, New York's Dream Act, just to name a few of the upwards to 19 different states or jurisdictions with these types of programs. How much is this costing taxpayers?
Yeah, so a study by the Federation for American Immigration Reform estimated, and Greg, you got to keep in mind, this is not just undergrad or higher education. This is estimating education as a whole. Illegal immigrants total around $5.7 billion nationally, and the largest portion of the fiscal impact are on state and local budgets. And so when you think about this study kind of on a macro scale, this is how much is going towards students that are not U.S. citizens, and you kind of think about the impact of what is that happening to taxpayers, and how is that impacting U.S. citizens and students that want to go to university and are trying to get that financial aid to be able to do that.
Esther, you talked to a couple of different people on this story on both sides, and you can kind of glean a little bit of what the debate's really about and kind of where the line is drawn in the sand for each side of this. Tell us what you found out from the Freedom Foundation.
Yeah, so I spoke with Rusty Brown. He's the director of special projects for the Freedom Foundation, and something he highlights, which I think everyone can recognize and have sympathy for this kind of situation, is it's a really complex issue. A lot of these students, these illegal immigrant students, didn't really choose to be here, didn't necessarily bring themselves over here. This is kind of a result of family or friends and kind of put them in this situation, and they're maybe trying to do the best that they can. And he acknowledges that this is complex and it's hard to kind of deny education to children maybe trying to do the right thing. And so it's definitely a moral issue, but you also have to raise the question of taxpayer dollars and how that's impacting American citizens. And so something he kind of emphasizes in one of his quotes, he says, if you're helping illegal immigrants, then what are you doing is cutting off funding that could be going to helping Americans' kids, and especially impoverished school districts. And there should be a focus on America first. So, you want to recognize this is a complex issue, and it's really hard to quantify every situation. And but at the end of the day, this is America. We want to focus on our school districts that are struggling financially, and the students that maybe are super smart, but they just didn't get the same opportunities as other kids. And, they were born here, they're U.S. citizens, and they kind of deserve the right to get that state aid or that federal financial aid to go to the college of their dreams. But on the flip side, had a lot of conversations with various school districts, specifically in California, the California Dream Act application, talking to the state of California. Their response is, well, undocumented students, are American students. They're taxpayers. Their parents are taxpayers. They deserve to have a seat at the table as well. And so you kind of have to figure out, okay, how much are they paying compared to U.S. citizens, to taxpayers who have been here, born and raised here, and is that quantifiable for them to have a seat at the table and have access to those state education funds as well?
And you also talked to the Chief Communications Officer for Colorado's Department of Higher Education, giving a bit of a perspective as to a payor of this who's giving these funds and these resources to these types of students. What did they have to say?
Yeah, so in her response in an email, she kind of said, when taxpayers express concerns about how public funds are used, the higher education department refers to legislation indicating Colorado students who, graduate from high school or earn their high school equivalency, they should also be awarded state-funded financial aid. And so kind of her response in explanation is saying, look, these taxpayers may be rightly concerned about what's actually happening with the money that they're contributing through their paycheck every 2 weeks or every month. But at the end of the day, what specifically the Colorado Department of Higher Education is going to focus on is legislation. And if we're seeing these students, attend these high schools, follow the requirements and apply through our application process, providing the necessary details that according to the law says they need, then they have every right to this legislation and they have every right to this funding. And if they want to go to a state school or community college, then they have the ability to do that. And so kind of going back to that idea of it's definitely a complex issue to try and figure out how do we quantify like whether we allow some people but not other people to get financial aid. But it goes back to that question of, are we valuing and prioritizing America first and America's students when it comes to this state aid and how is that, getting trumped or devalued compared to these illegal immigrant students entering the education system?
Well, $5.7 billion of taxpayer funds going to this. You can see why that's a big issue and something that the Trump administration has an eye on, and the ongoing conversation with 50 different states on how to address this. Obviously, that's a lot more that you're going to be reporting on, Esther. Greatly appreciate you taking the time with us here for the Center Square Daily. This is the Center Square Daily. I'm your host, Greg Bishop. We'll be right back. Well, the dust settling in Illinois after the primary election, and here with the Center Square Daily, I'm your host, Greg Bishop. Let's put Illinois in focus, and let's talk now with the candidates for the Republicans who won the nomination in Tuesday's election to take on the Democrat in the race, Don Tracy. Don joins us now, and we've got a few minutes with him on a busy day for him, obviously, after getting that election victory. So, Don, thanks for taking the time with us.
Sure, glad to be here. Greg, can you turn up your volume? I can barely hear you.
All right, we'll get our producer on that end to make sure that happens, or I'll just talk a little bit louder for you.
Okay.
So yeah, you won last night. Congratulations.
Thank you.
What's the next steps in this race?
Well, we're doing a lot of media interviews up here in Chicago, and we already have a great team. I think one of the reasons why we won is because we had a good plan and we executed that plan, and we built a good team, good primary team of almost 15 solid volunteers, staff, and then my consultant had a number of people on. And as a result, we were able to distribute about 8,000 yard signs, and of course we got on the ballot, and we had basically operations throughout the state. And for a general election like this, we're going to have to double that. So that'll be the next step, building that up, and then of course preparing to engage with Lieutenant Governor Stratton. Looking forward to that.
You've got like 8 months or so before the election, so there's going to be a lot of back and forth between the two of you and any possible other non-established party candidates that could get on the ballot for the 2026 election. What do you think are the big issues that taxpayers are going to be looking for from either side of this equation?
Well, one of the only things that the Lieutenant Governor and I agree on is that the cost of living, or affordability as they call it, is one of the biggest issues out there right now, and the long-term issue, which will be an issue throughout the campaign, I believe. And on that issue, I think that we are clearly in the best position because Democrats say elect more Democrats to reduce the cost of living, but everything Democrats do increases the cost of living. Starting with reckless spending, like under the Biden administration, we had historically high inflation, the highest in over 40 years, 20 to 30%, depending on who you talk to. And then they've been at war. The Democrats have been at war against a reliable, affordable, traditional energy for a number of years, and trying to transition overnight to green energy. and that has caused utility prices to go up. And of course, along the way, they've shut down, and are going to shut down some relatively clean fossil fuel plants around the country. And of course, when you reduce supply, you're going to have prices increase. And then taxes are part of cost of living. And the lieutenant governor, being part of the Pritzker administration, has to be accountable and responsible for the 49 tax increases there. And they love, new taxes and increasing old taxes. Healthcare inflation is running at 3 to 4 times overall inflation. And I think that's partly a product of the Obamacare and the problems with that. It needs to be fixed. And we need better price transparency enhancement. We need more consumer choice and more consumer involvement and more premium choices. Then we also have, Democrats, soft on crime. One of the lieutenant governor's allies was former Cook County State's Attorney Kim Foxx, and she, did not prosecute shoplifting, like many other, blue city prosecutors. And as a result, there is an epidemic of shoplifting, not just there, but in Springfield. You ask anybody, go to a CVS or Walgreens and ask them if people carry stuff out, and they'll say they do it all the time, and they're told not to do anything about it. And that increases the price of everything that you can carry out of a store.
So, Don, obviously affordability, crime, those are going to be some issues, but you've also got the foreign policy issues as well. When should Congress take a vote on declaring war?
When should what?
When should Congress declare war?
Well, Congress has not declared war since World War II, which was before I was born, of course. I think it was in 1942 or so when they declared war on Romania. And so that declaration of war traditionally is for, really true wars, not short military conflicts, not limited military action. And of course, I think we're all hoping that this will be a limited military action, a 5-week conflict.
So, Don, I know you're on limited time with us as it's just a few days after the election and you got all kinds of places you've got to be. But one last thing I want to talk to you about, at least today, because we'll connect with you in the future. And just for the record, we have put out an invitation to your opponent, Juliana Stratton, to have her on the program as well. But how do you get people out to the polls? And are you worried that not enough Republicans are going to be, encouraged or, have enough energy to get to the polls? And what do you do about those independents out there who might be undecided?
I'm very worried about turnout because the Democrats are mad as hornets now because, they're out of power in Washington, and they view Washington as kind of their own personal sandbox where they can, pull money out of taxpayers through Washington for all their special pet projects. So they're super mad. They're showing up at the polls, and Democrat and our Republicans are, basically apathetic and complacent, because, we have a Republican president in the White House, Republican control of Congress. And so they're going on with their lives. And Democrats traditionally anyway have always been all in on government because they and their special interest allies feed off the government. Republicans, on the other hand, we just want to be left alone by the government to do our jobs and raise our families. So, just starting out, it's hard to get Republicans and conservatives to the polls. But we have a strategy for that. And we're going to really focus on it because, President Trump won 2,450,000 votes in Illinois in 2024 without trying, without campaigning, without spending any money. And I think my win number is 2.1. So we're going to try to get all those voters out. But a lot of them we still won't be able to get out because a lot of them don't vote except in presidential elections. But we also another part of our strategy is to win the swing voters, independent voters, and I think my opponent will help that because some of her policies and her allies, like Mayor Brandon Johnson, like the Chicago Teachers Union, like Senator Elizabeth Warren, and Bernie Sanders, and her. I think that's going to turn off a lot of the middle of the road, independent swing voters, and her policy on government run healthcare. Her $30 trillion economic plan is going to turn off a lot of those swing voters. So that's our plan to win.
Don Tracy, the Republican nominee for Illinois U.S. Senate, greatly appreciate you carving out the time with us today for the Center Square Daily. Now it's time for America's Talking, with headlines from across the country that you can find at thecentersquare.com. A bill to institute a state income tax has been on Governor Bob Ferguson's desk in Washington for 5 days, and he's expected to sign it, but opponents are gearing up for legal challenges once he does. The Center Square's associate editor Carlene Johnson reports Ferguson has 20 days from the time of the delivery of the act of legislation on his desk, meaning it'll likely be signed before April 2nd, 2026. Three key opponents of the income tax talked to the Center Square about what they expect will happen after Ferguson signs the bill into law. One of them, Senate Minority Leader John Braun, told the Center Square in a Wednesday interview he expects wherever the challenge comes from, that it will be soon. Chris Gideon, a senator in Washington state, told the Center Square he believes the passage of the income tax could have a direct impact on whether the NBA decides to locate a franchise expansion team in Seattle. Meanwhile, in Wisconsin, Governor Tony Evers told reporters Wednesday that his deal with the legislature to agree to $72 million in funding for the state's food share program, if the food stamp program did not allow the purchase of candy or soft drinks, was all about compromise. The Center Square's John Stife reports that Evers and Democratic legislators did not want the purchase restrictions in place, arguing that many in food deserts had to rely on the occasional purchase of candy or soft drinks to get by. Evers had argued that the $72 million in funding was needed to prevent Wisconsin from going over a 6% error rate on Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program benefits, which could incur more than $200 million in federal penalties. Wisconsin has a 4.47% payment error rate as of 2024 to 2025. The Ohio Supreme Court, they could agree to take a case over deducting union dues from public employees' paychecks. The Center Square contributor David Beasley reports that Matthew Sheldon worked as a custodian at Carrollton Exempted Village Schools and joined the union, Ohio Association of Public School Employees. According to a synopsis of the case, that was in 2016, but he later quit the union in December 2023, but the union told the school district to continue deducting dues from his check because of a clause in the union contract that gave members a period in August to quit and cancel automatic dues deductions from their paychecks. A trial court and appellate court ruled against Sheldon, who appealed to the Ohio Supreme Court, which this week agreed to take the case. In seeking Ohio Supreme Court review, Sheldon's lawyers argued his case is a basic contract dispute. The Freedom Foundation and the National Right to Work Legal Defense Foundation also supported Sheldon's case. And speaking of unions, members of United Teachers Los Angeles say they're preparing to strike if the Los Angeles Unified School District does not agree to the union's demand for a 17% pay increase over 2 years. The Center Square contributor Chris Woodward reports to date there have been approximately 20 bargaining sessions for the union and the nation's second largest school district. UTLA members, which include more than just educators, say they want to avoid a strike. Meanwhile, OLEDA Incorporated, an organization that promotes parent leadership, amplifies voices, and holds LAUSD accountable for academic results, weighed in on the conversation. They asked, why is the United Teachers Los Angeles possibly calling for a strike before receipt of the neutral fact-finding and recommended settlement report, which is expected at the end of the month? They went on to say, is UTLA afraid of the fact-finding report to show that LAUSD's offer is fair given the circumstances? You can keep up on that story at thecentersquare.com and find these stories just below this video. And that's America's Talking, with some of the latest headlines from across the country with thecentersquare.com. From my studios in Central Illinois, I'm Greg Bishop. Join us back here Friday for more stories impacting you, the taxpayer, from around the country, only with the Center Square Daily.